Hello, everyone. Today I want to talk about lupus and autoimmune triggers. Now, I've spent this entire year trying to figure out what the majority of my triggers are. And I find it super interesting that all of us have different triggers, and what triggers my lupus flare might not trigger yours. But by sharing our triggers with each other, it might give us a little bit of insight into something maybe I've never thought to check into, or maybe I'm going to have a trigger that you never thought about that might be triggering you that you could check into. So, like I said, I spent most of this year figuring out 6 very specific triggers for my lupus flares. And I went from having 4 days out of every single week being sick to only being sick with autoimmune flares once every 2 months. So in every 2 months, I'm sick with an autoimmune or lupus flare for about 2 days, and that's it. Now, I went from having 4 days out of every single week having an autoimmune or a lupus flare to only being sick about 2 days every 2 months. And that is crazy to me. And it's worth investigating our triggers, isolating them, and controlling the ones that we can control. Now, I do have autoimmune triggers that I can't control, and that's okay. But I am going to continue to try and control the ones that I can. So let's talk about the 6 triggers that I figured out for myself this year. Now, I'm going to start with the really obvious ones, because this one can be a trigger for most of us, and it's the weather. For me, it's if it's too hot or even if it's too cold, I am triggered into a lupus flare. But it's not because the temperatures are changing. It's because I'm expending too much energy trying to either cool my body off or get it warm. And that the expending of energy produces a lupus flare. The second trigger that I figured out is lack of sleep. So I spent most of this year hacking my sleep, figuring out what I needed to sleep at least 7 to 8 hours almost every night. Now, I still have my nights where I can't go to sleep or I'm dealing with insomnia, but for the most part, the majority of my nights, I do get restful sleep. And that has helped, because as soon as I don't have a restful night or I'm not getting 7 to 8 hours the next day, I will have a lupus flare. All right, the third trigger I talked about a little bit with the first one, which is the expending too much energy. So when I use too much energy for too long of a time, and the timing is different for all of it, because I can go outside and if it's too cold and I shiver for 10 minutes, I'll have a lupus flare. So whether it's too hot or too cold, when I'm using too much energy, so that can even be walking, standing, talking, whatever it is, if it's too much energy, I have a lupus flare. So a lot of times when I do activities, I really have to watch the timing. So when I walk to work out, I have to time myself, and I make sure I have a good shutoff time so that I don't endanger myself with running out of energy when I'm walking throughout the neighborhood or something crazy like that. So using way too much energy, which for me can happen in a matter of minutes, I have a lupus flare. Now, let's talk about 2 of my triggers that I did not suspect at all and kind of blew my mind when I figured out it was an actual trigger. So the first one that I want to talk about is blood sugar spikes. If my blood sugar spikes too high, and I'm talking about a 40-point or more difference, I have a lupus flare. So I've really learned this year how not to spike my blood glucose levels. Now, it's natural to spike glucose levels. However, what I'm trying to do is blunt the spikes so that I don't have a spike that's out of control that pushes me into a lupus flare. Now, controlling my glucose numbers was probably one of the hardest things that I did this year, and it took all of this year to even get it all worked out and ironed out so that I'm not having lupus flares, every week like I was doing in the beginning. And who would have thought glucose spikes was a thing for lupus flares? For me, it is. And I'm learning that anything that breaks my body in any way, like too high of a glucose spike or whatever it is, I have a lupus flare. So I'm learning to control the things that I can control the triggers that I can control, like a glucose spike. Now, the next one I just figured out a few days ago, and it actually blew my mind again. I ran out of one of my supplements. Now, the supplement is to help with digestion. The supplement was hydrochloride betaine, and I take it. Now, I've taken it most of this year once I realized I was dealing with low stomach acid. However, during this year, I have not ran out of the supplement. So recently I ran out of the supplement and I thought, well, I'll pick it up in a few days. I didn't feel the urgency to run to the store to pick up that particular supplement. And I went about 4 days without it. Now, I have other enzymes and other things that I was trying for digestion, and I thought, well, I'll just take that for a few days. Big mistake. What happened is, after about the 3rd day, I had a lupus flare, and it was so out of the ordinary for me because I didn't do any of the other triggers that I know produce a lupus flare. The only thing that I've changed is running out of that particular supplement. And in my mind, I thought there's no way that helping my digestion, taking a supplement to help digestion, there's no way that running out of that would have me in a lupus flare. So I persisted and went a few days without the supplement. The next day, I had another lupus flare, and then it dawned on me, I better fill that supplement to see if I could go back to having good health. Now, without that particular supplement, I had a lupus flare every day for 2 days, which was unusual for me at this point. It wouldn't have been unusual in the beginning of my journey, but now it's very unusual for me. And I couldn't figure out what was triggering it because I was sleeping well. I was doing all the other things that I knew to do. And then all of a sudden, I fell flat on my face. Not only was I having lupus flares, but I had absolutely zero amount of energy. I fell flat on my face. I can't even describe it in enough detail for you to understand the situation. I was sick. I was struggling to function. Now, in the beginning of my channel, when I was making videos, that's how I felt all the time, 4 days out of every week. And I don't know how I was living like that. I really don't, because reverting back for a few days freaked me out. I was like, I can't do this. What's happening? Well, I simply ran out of a supplement. So I picked up the supplement, started taking it yesterday, and I'm already starting to feel better. The supplement that helps me with digestion now triggers a lupus flare if I don't have it. So obviously my body's working really hard trying to digest food, and it's not doing a too good of a job. And without that supplement, lupus flares now. Lupus flares. I don't know if I'm using so much energy trying to digest or that not digesting your food causes the lupus flare. Either way, I now have another supplement I really can't live without until I figure out what's causing the low stomach acid. And I may never figure that out. Those are the 6 triggers. 2 of them I had no idea was affecting lupus or autoimmune in any way. The rest I kind of assumed because they can kind of be a trigger for all of us. And this year I decided to control as many of my triggers as I could. Now we're going to have triggers we cannot control, like the weather. I can't control the weather. I don't know what Mother Nature's going to do. But by controlling the ones that I can control, I've really limited how many days I actually have a lupus flare. And to me, that has been worth all of the research, all of the time that I have put into this, because I have more days that I'm actually well and feeling good than I have actually feeling sick. And before, when I started this journey, most of my days I was sick. And when I reverted back the last few days to having a lupus flare every day and just not feeling enough energy, I really don't know how I made it through those days the way that I did, because now that I've been feeling better, reverting back was really hard, and it was almost depressing to go back to that stage. So figuring out your autoimmune triggers is really worth your time. It has been well worth my time. And in the comments, let's talk about what your triggers are, because sometimes what triggers you could be a light bulb moment for me to check into something that I didn't even think about. What's interesting is all of our triggers are so different, and it's interesting to talk about them because what triggers me may not trigger you, but it gives us a little bit more insight into what's happening when we have a lupus or autoimmune flare. So that's all that I have for you today. I'll see you guys in the next video.